Welcome back to Dead to the Code. This is Chris.
And this is Ian coming at you with the original episode plan that we've been trying to do. No more filler episodes. We're getting into a show.
Right, we're going to actually be reviewing a show that we watched. So, as we stated at the end of the last episode, we watched Gillette Stadium 2022, Foxborough, Massachusetts. Ian, I looked up on the website deadandcodb.com. It's like a database that I found on Dead and Company's Reddit for all of their shows. This was the 196th Dead and Company show.
That's cool. Yeah, I guess 2022. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
And
that's a lot of
I'll say
shows.
I don't know if it was obvious last episode, but I kind of picked this randomly out of the albums that were on Spotify. Um, and I feel like it works pretty well with what we talked about last time. So it's funny
Yes,
how that worked out.
I'm glad you noticed that too. It had a few songs that we mentioned were underrated from our last pod. And one other quick note about this show, as I mentioned, it was the 196th Dead and Company show. The average user rating for this show on this website was 4.07 stars out of 5, which was a little bit low compared to some of the other shows. Now, I didn't get that impression when I was watching this show. I thought it was pretty good, just high level thoughts at up front, but interesting to see that the community has a little bit lower rated.
That's so like shows that were around that same time. It was lower
Just
rated.
all of just in the database, that's among the lower
Hmm.
end. There's some shows
Okay.
in the twos and threes, but a lot of the shows are like pretty highly rated, and this one was a little
Okay.
bit lower. So I just thought that was interesting, but we can kind of get into it a little bit about this. I thought it was interesting. They were playing at Gillette Stadium and not Fenway Park. I guess the Red Sox were maybe home that weekend or something like that.
Yeah, it's true. I forgot to look this up, but do you know how many times they played at Fenway versus Gillette?
That's a good question. I actually don't. I'm sure I could find it pretty quickly using this website. It looks like they've played twice at Gillette and then Fenway, yeah, 5 or 6 times. So there you have it. It seems like Fenway is
Yep.
the more popular option for them.
Yeah, and I've never been. I think neither of us have been to a Dead and Company show at a baseball stadium, which they've done. Fenway, obviously, Wrigley, where the Mets. What's the Mets stadium?
City.
City. Yeah, and I think maybe some out west. I don't know.
Yeah, Dodger Stadium and the
Never
Giants
play at a.
Stadium.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be fun to see Dead and Company at a ballpark. I That brings me to a point that I think I had in my notes here because I took some notes when watching the show that I was gonna say, and that's that I just miss outdoor Dead and Company shows. I think Sphere is awesome, obviously. Like it's such a unique experience. It's so immersive, but it doesn't, there's nothing quite like being outside on a summer night, listening to the Dead
Yeah.
sitting in the lawn or wherever you sit at the show. It's just a good experience.
Yeah, and I wonder, I don't know this as a fact, but Nats Park didn't really do summer concerts until last year or the year before.
Definitely
But like
more recent.
sort of like when they had already decided that Jiffy Lube is like the place that they were gonna go for like DC area, Virginia area. So what could have been seeing a Dead and Company show at Nats Park.
Yeah, that would be our local stadium, or it'd be even cooler if they played in Camden Yards, but I don't see that happening.
I feel like Camden Yards is too small for
Yeah,
what they try to do. But yeah,
probably.
I haven't been to any of the bigger shows they've done there.
Yeah, I've been to, I saw Billy Joel at Camden Yards,
I was gonna
but
say that's probably the biggest. Um,
show they've had. Alrighty,
yeah,
so let's
I
go
can.
ahead and let's go ahead and get into this one. We started with Cumberland Blues. I thought this was a heater to open. I think I love Cumberland Blues. I think it's such a good song. I almost put it as one of my underrateds, but it wasn't quite fitting because Cumberland Blues is a song that play quite often. But I just thought for being one of their, I think it's like a signature song for Dead and Company. That's how much I like Cumberland Blues.
Yeah, so to my knowledge, this is the only time they opened with Cumberland Blues. I looked into it a little bit. I couldn't find another show where they opened with that. It's similar to they've done this a couple times with a couple songs that I feel like aren't necessarily openers, and then they play Bertha right after, which is sort of like one of the more common openers off the top of my head. So I'm wondering if it's just sort of like, yeah, let's flip it today and let's do Cumberland Blues first and then go to Bertha after.
Yeah, it's almost like a little bit of a bonus song that they're just bringing to the front and being like, here's a nice song that you get later on in the show, and then it's like, now let's start the real show. That's
Yeah.
good insight. I didn't realize that that was the first time that we presume they opened with Cumberland Blues that we're aware of. So that's pretty cool. And yeah, as you said, they go into Bertha. After Bertha, there was a
Well,
weather delay.
right before, I know we probably won't deep dive into Bertha every time. It's a pretty common song, but I just want to say I really liked it after Cumberland Blues. I thought that was fun. It's like a little bit more mellow, but like same tempo how they were playing it. I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. I agree with that. I thought because they did Cumberland Blues first and went into Bertha, it kind of helped Bertha stand out a little bit more rather than just being like the classic Bertha opening that we're used to. So that is a good point. But after Bertha, I actually sensed that they'd be going into Good Lovin'. It just felt right for some reason. Obviously, they've done that before, but there was a weather delay, so you probably can't tell when listening to the audio, but in the video, there was a really weird clip, and I was like, what was
Yeah.
that cut? And that's because of the weather. So maybe that's a little bit why the show was lower rated on the website that I was mentioning earlier, but yeah, I just thought that was interesting when we get a whenever we get a weather delay, especially in Bertha when they're like ran into a rainstorm and everyone goes crazy. It's always fun.
Yeah, so I was looking at the set list of this too, so I knew that this so it was just the two songs in the first set, and then everything else was the second set, which wasn't super apparent when I was just listening to the audio.
Hmm.
Um, but I think this isn't the first time that this has happened, and the normal case is that they just play on through and don't have to separate it. It makes it sort of a distinct show where they just kind of go like full throttle the rest of the time.
Yeah, it does. It's not your traditional two set approach. So even when we're trying to do normal programming, it's not quite normal because the set lists are all wonky. But yeah, so we end set one with Cumberland Blues and Bertha. Ian, what was your standout moment of set one?
Yeah, you know what? It feels like this song is always going to get overshadowed for stand-up moments. So I'll say my stand-up moment was Bertha, and this is a
I
really
love
good
it.
version of it.
I love that. Give Bertha an opportunity to shine. For me, it would probably be Cumberland Blues to open, but I think you can't go wrong picking either one of those as kind of your standout moment. And so set two, we start with Good Lovin', which, as we know, is a good transition song out of Bertha. So they kind of pick up right where they left off. I thought Bob was really leaning into this one. There's something about seeing, as you lovingly refer to him as Old Man Bob, talk about who needs it. It's shouting
Yeah.
that to the crowd and getting the call and response. It's just really, it's really fun. And I think this song gets better with Bob's age because it's a little ironic sounding.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I feel like normally when I say Old Man Bob, it's like him doing what was formerly a Jerry song, and now that he's older, it brings a new dimension to it. But I love Good Lovin'. I feel like this has such an iconic Bobby song, like their entire career. So like Grateful Dead and Dead and Company, and it just got better. Um, One thing I liked about this specific version is I'm assuming it was because they had the weather delay and the crowd sort of had pent up energy, but you could definitely hear the crowd on the recording, which I thought was really fun. Um, yeah, that's a great song. Like the line, "Even a blind man knows when the sun is shining." Think about that all the time. It's just great.
That's such an Ian thing to just grab onto a line like that. That's profound and just have it stuck in your head resonating. By the way, I like the Billy String shirt. That is a cool shirt that you're wearing. For those that are
Yeah,
just
thank you.
listening, Yeah, for those that are just listening to the audio, you don't get to see Ian's cool shirt, and I'm wearing a Dead and Company hat at the moment. So we're pretty decked out on theme right now.
Yeah, I almost wore my Billy shirt that I wore, I think, a couple episodes ago. So I remembered at the last second. I changed it up.
Changed your Billy String shirts for the day. That's funny. We leave Good Lovin' and we go into Crazy Fingers. I love the opening riff of Crazy Fingers and also kind of the end of the song. The middle of the song for me is kind of like meandering. It doesn't always hold my attention all the way through. But do you have any thoughts on this song?
Um, Kind of similar, where this is a song that I looked it up because I was curious, and they seem to like pretty consistently play this song like twice a year, like have it in the rotation. But obviously, it seems like a song that they intentionally want to get to, but don't isn't necessarily a staple. Um, I liked it. I thought it was a good kind of transition from Good Lovin'.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Again, it's not one of my favorites, but I think it's, good enough. The cool thing about watching the show is you get to see like the little intricate moments during the songs that you might not see when you're listening to it. And one of them was just seeing John switch guitars, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. So he switched guitars to a different PRS, but I think it was more to set up Uncle Charlie. And Uncle Charlie is always a great song. I feel like Dead and Company
Mr.
play.
Charlie, not Uncle
Uh,
Charlie.
Thank you for correcting me. I always call it Uncle Charlie because of baseball and the curveball
Yeah,
and
I was
being.
gonna say Uncle Charlie is like the baseball thing, the
Oh my
baseball head.
God. Well, thank you. Yeah, Mr. Charlie, not Uncle Charlie. And I always love Mr. Charlie. I feel like John's voice always sounds really good on it, and it's just a song that I feel like Dead and Company has played more and more recently, but I might be wrong on that.
Yeah, no, it's definitely in John's wheelhouse. Not to spoil the next song's coming up, but I feel like it was like the appetizer for the next couple of songs. Like get into the vibe of sort of the more bluesy tone, probably why I switches guitar at the
Right.
beginning. Um, yeah. Do you want to get into the next song?
Yeah, we go into Saint Stephen and the 11, which I had mentioned on our underrated draft as being one of the songs that I feel is underrated, one of the song combinations. I thought this Saint Stephen sounded really good. There are so many distinct parts to that song. You have Saint Stephen, you have the bridge that is like the 11 kind of before they go into the 11. I'm not sure how to describe it really. But there's like a bridge that sounds similar to the 11 and then they go into that bridge where it's like marching. I don't know how to
Yeah,
describe it.
it's William Tell
William
is
Tell,
so
yeah.
it's I don't so this was something first of all this was like the full St. Stephen suite,
Right.
which I don't I and my point of all this is like I don't know exactly. I wish we could look up how often they just do like a more pared down St. Stephen versus like being an all in like all meat and potatoes. Because first of all, this St. Stephen was 21 minutes long,
Right.
which I think is like the more traditional length of it. Um, and I wish I could. That would be something for the future to see like how often they do like a 12-minute St. Stephen, like just St. Stephen. Because I wrote this in my notes when I was listening to it. First of all, John and Jeff bromance. I think during this song they had a couple of moments together.
Yep.
Um, but I remember looking up at the track because I'm like, damn, they've been jamming on this song for a while, and it's like 10 minutes, like halfway through the 21-minute full full length of the song. So it was like the full St. Stephen. They kind of like teased William Tell for a second. The last St. Stephen verse went into the William Tell kind of like bridge to the 11. So I thought it was pretty good. And this was like the first moment going back to last week where this is one of your favorites or one you think is underrated.
Yes. And you kind of said it better than I said it. And that's what I was trying to express is that St. Stephen has so many, this was the full suite of it. And that was really cool. So I noticed that same thing. I thought that was really fun. And just another thing, they teased Deep Ellum Blues during St. Stephen. It was like real brief. It was like 4 bars probably, but there was like the dun 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 dun
Well,
dun dun.
I
Yeah,
didn't catch that during
John
that.
was
That's a
playing
good
that.
pick.
He did that riff on his guitar, and I just thought that was fun. So, no Deep Ellum Blues in this concert, but they did, or at least John gave a little tease of it. So yeah, really good St. Stephen and the 11. Um, and then we go into Brown Eyed Women, which caught me off guard. I did not expect that song to show up here. This could have been a product of maybe the delay, and maybe they were going to play Brown Eyed Women earlier in the first set or something, or they could have kept it for the second set. But following the long St. Stephen suite, I wasn't expecting Brown Eyed Women.
Yeah, this was something that it felt like they wanted a song before the next longer songs that they were going to play, and they felt like this was a good spot for Brown Eyed Woman. Um, I actually have not a complaint necessarily, but I did sort of have this thought when listening that like Brown Eyed Women sounds the same in a lot of shows, I think,
Right.
and that's something I wish that like having like a distinctly different sounding Brown Eyed Woman is pretty rare for Den Company. And that was my main thought with this. Was like, wow, this sounds like the Brown Eyed Woman I listened to yesterday in a different show. I did think it was funny, not funny because it was a serious matter, I'm sure. Um, but John called out um, the like the worker, the venue worker, and he just has such a PR voice. Like that was like PR Johnny Salami, like public relations. Um, that he kind of like dipped into that persona for a second.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I'm surprised that was on the audio. I saw it during the video. I didn't know if they would transfer that over or if it would get cut. But yeah, he was calling for a medic for somebody in the crowd. And you're right. It was like I kind of thought the same thing. Like, and it's good that he did it, that he stopped the show and called it out. But there's been instances recently when celebrities haven't done that, and it led to something far worse happening. So he definitely like the alarm went off in his head to stop the show, call out what was happening, ask for a medic before they proceed, because that's what all artists are now, of course, being taught, which is good. It's a good thing. But I caught the same thing, his PR kind of voice. I know exactly what you're saying. So grateful that he did it, but it is funny that they caught it on the show audio. So yeah, and I think what you were saying to Brown Eyed Woman was an excellent point. It's one of their best songs. There's no doubt. I love it. It is always a heater. It's a good song to show people when they're asking me about Dead and Company or Grateful Dead. I recommend Brown Eyed Women because it has a bit of mainstream appeal. There's something about the sound of it and the song that is, I think, catchy to most people. But with that being said, most Brown Eyed Women's do sound the same, at least in Dead and Company context. So that's an excellent point. It's one of their best songs, but at the same time, it's one of their most familiar songs every time you hear it. And we
Yeah.
leave, yeah,
Well, I was just gonna say, kind of going back to what I said before, going into Estimated in Eyes, I feel like they wanted like a even for them just to have like a little bit of a totally different song that's a quick just to kind of get loose before jumping in these next two songs.
yeah, but when you look at that lineup right there of songs, you go from Mr. Charlie to Saint Stephen, The 11, Brown Eyed Women, Estimated Prophet, Eyes of the World. That's a really solid stretch of songs right there, some pretty heavy hitters. And I think that's because probably, again, the rain delay and this being maybe a little more of a condensed show, that they're packing in some good ones kind of back to back to back. Estimated Prophet to me, again, kind of what you were saying to Brown Eyed Women, a lot of estimated profits sound similar to me. There's probably more variation than Brown Eyed Women, but it was good, but I don't really have any notes on this specific version.
Yeah, so I'll have maybe not to each of these songs, but I this was when I was running earlier. I listened to Estimated Eyes, Drums in Space. Um, and I always like when it's happened a couple of times where I'm ending my run on drums and It's like definitely a good timing sort of thing. Um, but yeah, so great versions, I think, and I agree with your point that these sound like often pretty similar when Dead and Company do it.
Yeah. Eyes of the World, though, I thought was really good. I thought they played very well, and I always love O'Teal's bass solo during Eyes of the World towards the end. That's kind of one of the standout moments for me, probably of this second set was that, and they do that often, but I always like it because you don't get many moments for O'Teal to shine like that on the bass. So I thought that was cool.
Yeah,
And then we go into another set of songs. Well, Drums in Space. Do you have any notes on Drums in Space before we go out of them? You mentioned that you
no,
were
but I
running.
do think, yeah, I do think we need within ranking the shows also have like a start having some more context for Jumps in Space and how, like the versions that we think are kind of standout versions. Um, because to me, my I was trying to do that when I was looking at this version, and I was like, this sounds like a very average Jumps in Space. So maybe this is a good baseline that we can put as like better than or worse than.
Okay, I like that. I think that's a great point. I often gloss over it, but we shouldn't. We should give it the respect it deserves because there are some interesting moments in Drums in Space that you can get. For me, I was doing laundry during this, so I had kind of zoned out and I was just flowing with the ambient vibe of it. I would agree it sounded pretty average. So if we use this as a baseline for moving forwards, we can say, is this better or worse than the Gillette Drums in Space as kind of our baseline? I think that's a good idea.
All right.
Um,
And then like you were starting to get into the second point for underrated songs in the Dead and Co. arsenal.
right. Dear Mr. Fantasy and Hey Jude. What did you think of these after what I was saying last episode? Did you enjoy this set of Dear Mr. Fantasy and Hey Jude?
Yeah, so I thought Dear Mr. Fantasy was like very much like a Mr. Charlie sort of vibe from John, which seems like kind of leaning into the blues scales and such.
Hmm.
Um, which I liked. And then I thought that the Hey Jude reprise was pretty good. Like I said in the earlier song, like you could really hear the crowd on the recording at the end, which was
Yes.
pretty fun.
Yeah, just a shout out to the crowd for their energy that they brought during this show. I think, like you mentioned, part of it was probably due to the weather delay and being a little pent up, but they were a great crowd. I also noticed the same thing during Hey Jude. They were really into it. And I got a little like meta while I was watching it. I was like, wow, they're playing the crowd like an instrument. Like they were
Yeah.
using the crowd as an additional vocalist really towards the end. Like they're just fading out their guitars and the drums and it gets real soft and they just let the crowd take over. And I thought it was really well done. Um, uh during this before when they like were doing the na 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 Bob like went like this to the crowd. He was like put his hand behind his ear like I can't hear you. So he did egg them on, encourage them a little bit there.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I feel like this is the spot where it happens. I think "Not Fade Away" is like probably the most common song coming out of Drums in Space. It feels like first of all the band got a little bit of break, so they come out with like maybe a little bit more focused energy, um, and the crowd knows like this is the end of the show. Let's lean into it a little bit more.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, and then we go into Morning Dew, kind of the slower song. This is always kind of the last slot for a slower song before I mean, they go into Heaven's Door afterwards, which is also a little bit slow, but they always kind of have this slower song towards the end. I like Morning Dew. I think for this placement, this was a good song. I do think Morning Dew is a song that I prefer Grateful Dead over Dead and Company, just on average, which I know most people would say most songs because Grateful Dead are the OGs. But just specifically Morning Dew, I like better from the Grateful Dead. I think Jerry's voice sounds good on it, but this one was still good. I liked it.
Yeah, I thought this was like a good timing with the Dear Mr. Fantasy and Hey Jude, kind of
Hmm.
kind of like peaking that energy and then bringing it down a little bit more before getting into the set closer and encore. I thought this was pretty good.
Hmm.
Um, I agree. I think Morning Dew, the way Jerry Garcia did it, is one of the special parts of Grateful Dead. So it's always going to be held like in that higher regard. But I think this is also one of the songs that Bob does really well as Old Man Bob now.
Right.
I like both
Yes.
versions.
Yeah, I like both as well. Did you watch Long Strange Trip, the documentary
Hmm.
on Amazon? Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe there's a special morning dew in that they cover towards the end of that documentary, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken.
Yeah, the one that was on Europe 72, the
Right.
Lyceum, I believe. Mhm.
Right. Yeah, that was good. So I always think of that when I hear Morning Dew. And then we get Heaven's Door, and this is always an emotional song. It's funny, it's one of the simplest songs in terms of like chord structure and even lyrics. Like it's a very simple kind of song that Bob Dylan wrote, and it always though, despite it being simple, it always brings me in and hooks me, and it always draws out that emotion. Um, there was something really sweet. I don't know if you captured it on the recording, but the crowd was cheering, every time they would flash somebody on the screen. And
Oh,
yeah, and Bob kept looking back over his shoulder to look at each one. Like he literally stopped playing and was like looking. And it just kind of made me sad for him because he's looking at all these people that he's lost. And since then, since 2022, we've lost Bill Walton, Phil Lesh, of course, others within the Grateful Dead world. And it just made me sad to think that like these people are, kind of passing the torch on, but Bob's still carrying it forward. And yeah, I just kind of got a little like reflective when watching it because I could tell that he was doing the same.
yeah, that's a good point. I heard the cheering on the recording, but I think that's one for the watching the actual show because I didn't know why they were cheering.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's a good moment. I think this song is it's one of the better, American folk songs. I think so many artists have done this well, and it's always I'm always a fan of hearing it from no matter which band I'm listening to.
Yeah, that's well said. And then we get into One More Saturday Night to end us, Bob's favorite. This is the quintessential Bob Weir song. I'm assuming this show was on a Saturday since they played it. I actually didn't know, because we were watching this 3 years later. I didn't know this was a Saturday, so it caught me off guard when they played the opening riff to One More Saturday Night. But, not much to say here, but just it's fun to watch them play this song because you can tell the energy that Bob has for it, and I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think if I were to criticize this show, I think this was a very good show, and I'm surprised it was rated so well. Sort of getting into the summary of it. Um, it felt weird doing Morning Dew, Knock on Heaven's Door, One More Saturday Night, even though that order isn't super weird generally, but I feel like maybe it was like I was starting to pick up from like the Knock on Heaven's Door, um, them showing everyone and then cheering. It felt like the show was already over. And I know that's sort of like the definition of encore. It's like the show's over. It's one more song, but I almost wish they flipped it, doing One More Saturday Night as a set closer and then encore, Knock on Heaven's Door. I think like going from, if this makes sense, the order of doing like a slow song, a faster song, One More Saturday Night, and then finishing on the slow song works a little better than doing the two slow songs together and then finishing One More Saturday Night. Um,
I can
my run,
totally,
my one criticism for this show.
I can totally see that point. I think you make an interesting point. Yeah, I can get behind that for sure. I don't have too many criticisms for this show. I think what you're noticing though, again, is could be a product in some sense of the rain delay and I'm assuming they rearranged the set list somewhat. So, um, yeah, I think this show just gets a little funky because it's not your classic two set approach. But overall, I think it's a really solid show, and I'm glad that we watched this one. How would you? I don't know if we want to start this segment or not. I was gonna ask, would you rate this out of five? Is there a rating that you would give
Yeah,
this?
so like I feel like the five point rating scale is the better way to go. And maybe we can
Right.
get into that another day. Um, and I know this was rated as a four, and I thought it was weird that people were rating it so low. But I try to make it like more even on the 5 point scale and not like skewed more fours and fives. So I would say I really enjoyed the show. I'm glad it felt like a really high quality show to start out with. So I'm glad I listened to it. I would rate it as a 4 out of 5, but I'm also going to rate a lot more threes than other people would. So
Yeah, I think we
as
should create our own rating system and not rely on what I saw on that website because four was like low on that website. But that's, we don't want to get into decimals too much and all that type of stuff. I would also say that this was around a 4 out of 5 in our own context. Um, Yeah. So I thought it was good. Not much else to say on the show other than I'm glad we watched it. And I think maybe we'll do maybe a fun episode next and then get back into our regular programming just to keep things fresh. I'm not really sure if we decide to do a regular show next. I can put an update on our Instagram. That's a good plug. Follow us at Dead to the Co on Insta. We have a whopping 8 followers, I think, at the moment. So we're really loving to see the online expansion that this company, podcast, not company, that this podcast is having.
yeah.
Um,
So I guess yeah, follow us on Instagram and be on the lookout for what we decide to do the next show on.
yeah, we should have decided that beforehand, but it's all good.
That's fine.
Sweet. Well, thanks for listening again. We'll catch you all next time on Dead to the Co. Take care.